Have scientists found evidence for the existence of the soul? A scientist found a very weird thing coming out of the body. They have captured something that looks like an aura in their instruments. You must have seen on the internet as well. Some reports are claiming this. Well, you won't believe it. What did the scientists see? Take a close look at this image. These are pictures of a man taken at different times. In this, the blue part is normal, but the green, yellow, and red areas are parts of the body. It is emitting a special kind of light, and no, these are not infrared camera images that capture body heat. Let me show you an infrared image as well. It looks something like this. Body heat is highest in the midsection, which is why these areas are lighting up here. But in the photos taken during the experiment, the midsection is not lighting up at all. Notice how these light particles are most visible in the center of the face. But the image of a dead person looks like this, completely blue and lifeless. Here's another example. This is a living mouse and this is a dead mouse. So what exactly is this glowing thing that appears in a living being? But after its death, it suddenly disappears. And it's not even body heat. Well, this exact question also came to a brilliant Japanese scientist, Masaki Kobayashi, at Tohoku University in 2009. To find the answer, he performed this human light experiment. And Masaki had no idea that the discovery he was about to make would bring about a revolution that would forever change the way we see the world. Well, during this time, many people believed this, including many scientists, that this could never give us clear evidence of the existence of the soul or consciousness. And they even demonstrated this by performing experiments. But Masaki still wasn't completely convinced by this. After all, what did Masaki know about this unknown light source? In 1923, a Russian biologist named Alexander Gurwitsch in the Soviet Union was obsessed with this, with the question of how a single cell divides and becomes two. For this, he was closely observing some onion roots under a microscope. And that's when he saw that the cells at the tip of the root were somehow communicating with each other. They were sending signals to each other to multiply, but not through slow chemical signaling, rather through instant and invisible signaling. He hypothesized that cells emit some kind of invisible radiation that sends signals to other cells to multiply, and that's how cells go from 1 to 2. He named it mitogenetic radiation. But was he able to prove this claim right? Well, he designed a very smart experiment. To test this, he took 2 onions with roots, where one onion's root was in the growing stage. This was called the sender onion, which would send the signal, and the other onion was called the receiver, which would receive the signal. He then precisely pointed the tip of the sender onion's root towards the root of the other onion, and a thin glass of quartz was placed in between so that there would be no direct contact or chemical signaling. He left the setup like this for a few days, and when he came back, he checked the results under the microscope. His heartbeat got faster, because in the area of the receiver root where the tip of the sender root was pointing, in that exact area, the cells had multiplied in large numbers. The quantity is much higher than in other unexposed areas, and just a few years before that, in 1905, you might remember, Einstein's special theory of relativity was also published, which considered light as a fundamental idea. And that's why Gurwitsch was absolutely convinced that this invisible light, or you can call it aura or mitogenetic radiation, really exists, which sends signals for cells to grow. And he formally published this discovery in a research paper in 1923. As soon as it was published, a big wave spread among scientists from Moscow to Berlin. Gurwitsch became an overnight sensation, and all the scientists started trying to replicate this experiment in their own laboratories. Now comes a twist in the story. In just a few years, when more than 500 scientists independently tested this claim, everyone started getting mixed results. Some saw growth, while others saw no difference at all, and no one found any proof of that mysterious light either. Now this gave the critics, who had been silent for years, a chance to speak up. Some scientists started calling Gurwitz's research an optical illusion. A physicist named Irving Langmuir even called it straight-up pathological science, basically meaning sick science. But Gurwitsch was 100% convinced about his discovery. He also published 2 books, The Theory of Biological Field in 1944 and mitogenetic radiation in 1945. And until his last moments, he kept promoting this idea and finally passed away in 1954. He entrusted his theory to his daughter Anna Gurwitsch, giving her the responsibility to prove it true. The responsibility to prove it true. The year is 1962. Technology becomes a little more advanced. While experimenting with a special kind of device, Anna feels she has found something big, something that could restore her father's lost honor. The device was photon counter multiplier, as the name suggests, is basically a counter and a multiplier for photons, which are particles of light. Just like how an audio amplifier amplifies the low audio input captured by a mic, this device similarly amplifies the input of low light particles so that we can easily measure them. Anna kept this device in a dark box in front of the plant cells for some time. And within a short time, even though there was complete darkness, this detector started detecting light particles. And whoa, exactly as Alexander Gurwitsch said, these cells actually produce light, which just can't be seen by our eyes, because they are in the ultraviolet spectrum of 200 to 300 nanometers. Let me explain. Look at this. These are the particles of light. Photons. In physics, these photons travel like a wave, and that's why we also call light an electromagnetic wave. These light particles travel in waveform at different frequencies, but we can only see those frequencies of light, which travel in the range of 380 to 780 nanometers, which we call the visible light spectrum. But because these cells were releasing light in the range of 200 to 300 nanometers, that's why we couldn't see the light of this ultraviolet spectrum with our eyes. Plus, the detector also showed the number of light particles. Here, extremely few were being released. Only 1 to 1000 photons per centimeter square per second, whereas a typical 60-watt bulb emits about 1 quintillion photons per centimeter square per second. And until now, no one had been able to prove the light emitted from living cells. Now let's see how this new discovery will open up a whole new unknown dimension in the future. But did you see how difficult it was to capture data in the 1900s? Now, naturally, after such a big discovery, once again, many scientists started taking interest in Gurwitsch's work. Many of these big questions started to be released, because this meant that our body must also be releasing light. So does this light play any role in our survival? Many of our body's main functions don't depend on this light, do they? If yes, then can we measure these light particles coming out of someone's body and tell something about a person's health? Like, does he have any hidden serious disease that's silently killing him before time? Some hidden killer, like cancer. Fritz Albert Popp was one of those scientists who, in the 1970s, was quite obsessed about cancer research. Around this time, at the University of Marburg, he comes across Gurwitsch's research papers and becomes very fascinated by this whole concept of living cells emitting light particles. He is the first in history to name them biophotons. And he starts calling this process ultra-weak photon emission and begins to research it in more depth. He is the first to test the existence of these particles himself through experiments. But along with this, he also makes another big discovery, that these photons you see, these aren't just random light leakages, but rather they're actually events of the cells. Our body has a sophisticated communication system that regulates every single function, from DNA repair to growth and maintenance. He claimed that they create coherent patterns of biophotons. Through these patterns, important biological information is effectively communicated. Those are coherent patterns. This is basically a term from quantum mechanics, and if I explain it in very short, then look. If many waves are aligned in the same pattern or order and are focused, then that is called a coherent pattern. Like a laser light, which travels in a very focused and unidirectional way, and even the optical fibers that deliver high-speed internet use laser light to deliver data packets. Because there is no interference, communication happens super effectively. If the order of those waves is not the same, then they are called an incoherent pattern. Like a bulb, for example, which when turned on, randomly emits light in all directions. A lot of information gets wasted because of this, communication becomes weak, and a lot of extra noise is also created. But how did Fritz Albert Popp say that the light coming out of the cell is forming only coherent patterns? Well, he collected the statistical data of all the released photons, which showed that these photons were being emitted in a fixed pattern of harmony, like a synchronized piece of music. Because of this, he proposed the grand theory that these biophotons are like a cellular radio, which is released by the cell's DNA, which spreads the signals for growth, repair, and even immune responses throughout the body. It is only through the proper communication of these signals that a body is able to function properly. If there's even a slight glitch in these signals, the body becomes sick. For example, he claimed that in cancer cells, the coherent pattern of these light particles gets disturbed. That means, according to this theory, whether someone has hidden cancer in their body or not can be detected from the light coming out of their cells. That's quite a big revelation, right? He also published all this in his 1989 book, Biophotonics. But how true was this? Because until now, we didn't have any proof of it. But Fritz Albert Popp was a very charismatic and inspirational scientist who left no stone unturned in spreading his big idea. He gave speeches at conferences, wrote books, and even linked biophotons with quantum mechanics, which led to his idea being widely publicized around the world. And after establishing the International Institute of Biophysics in Germany, Fritz Albert Popp had become the father of biophotonics. But as soon as Popp's ideas became famous, it was as if the entire scientific community had split into two groups. The first group was the believers, who were inspired by Popp's ideas and started researching further on this, and the second group became the disbelievers. They didn't agree with this at all. They believed that there must be some other explanation for these weak biophotons. Now let me ask you, friends, if you were there, which group would you choose and who was actually right? Well, as you will see ahead, how Popp's discoveries blurred the line between science and spirituality for decades. Even scientists couldn't understand what was science and what was spirituality or metaphysics. Its impact was such that even today, many common people can't understand the difference between science and spirituality. They can't understand the difference between scientific proofs and spiritual claims or speculations, and they can't distinguish between faith and superstition.
Some people's auras are weaker than others, and some people's auras are more you gravitate towards them. And that's the difference between a star and a non-star, to be frank. It's an energy, and that aura particularly grabs people's attention, and not everyone's gaze is good.
But this video will also make it clear today with the full historical and scientific context. So, back to the 1990s, one of the many scientists inspired by Fritz Albert Popp was the Russian scientist Konstantin Korotkov, who claimed some absolutely mind-blowing discoveries in the 1990s. One of these discoveries was that after a person's death, his body gradually releases consciousness in the form of an aura over 24 to 48 hours. Well, in the 1990s, Konstantin created a device with which he could measure a person's aura, which he called the biofield, and determine the patient's energy state. He could also find out if the person was experiencing any physical or mental pain or illness. The name of this device was gas discharge visualization. Gas discharge visualization, and Konstantin believed that this aura was actually evidence of consciousness, which depended not only on a person's physical and mental health, but also on their spiritual health. In 1998, he also wrote a book called Light After Life, in which he made several controversial claims. For example, he wrote that after a person dies, their body gradually releases its aura or consciousness into the surrounding areas and objects as if the soul is leaving the body. According to him, this can also be measured with the gas discharge visualization device because the energy levels of the surrounding objects will start to change. Even how a person died also determines what kind of aura they will leave behind. If they died in an unnatural or violent way, the light of the aura coming out of their body will be very intense, irregular, and prolonged, reflecting unresolved emotions. And if the death was peaceful and natural, it will be released in a steady and smooth way. Basically, Konstantin tried to connect science and spirituality through his work, which was a good attempt. But unfortunately, even though his book became popular, his work did not gain that much credibility in the scientific community. Because Constantine's experiments were conducted with very small sample sizes and none of the experiments were peer-reviewed. That means it was not tested and verified by multiple other scientists. It means there was a good chance that Constantine might have been misinterpreting the results, that is, seeing them in a different way. I will tell you exactly what happened with him next. But in the 1990s, there was another scientist from Japan, Masaru Emoto, who is still extremely popular today. And he went a step further and declared the idea of this light's consciousness or energy field to be universal. That means not just humans, but consciousness is like a field that exists throughout the entire universe, including water, meaning even water has it. Yes, consciousness in water. Some people might not even swallow this idea while drinking water. But Emoto performed some mind-blowing experiments while talking to water to prove this, which also became world famous. He took distilled, that is, pure water in 2 containers. He exposed one container to positive messages and the other to negative messages. Like he stuck some positive words on the outside of one container with the words facing inward, words like love, gratitude, peace, harmony, while on the other container he stuck negative words like hate, evil, stupid, disgust. In front of the positive container, his staff was also verbally repeating the positive words again and again, while in front of the negative containers, they were repeating the negative words. And then finally, he took small 0.5 milliliter samples from both containers, put them in plates, and kept them to freeze at minus 20 degrees Celsius. He found that the ice structures or snowflakes from the positive containers samples were healthier, more structured, and more symmetrical. But on the other hand, the structure of the ice from the water exposed to negative messages was very asymmetrical, unhealthy, and irregular. He tested this many times, even with different messages. He also found a difference between city tap water and natural mountain water, and said that city tap water has a lot of negative energy, while natural water has a positive energy.
When water travels in a city, it collects negative information from the people and pollution. What concerns me is that water from any big city tends not to form beautiful crystals.
Emoto published his book in 2003, The Hidden Messages in Water, which became a New York Times bestseller. Even today, this book has a 4.7-star rating on Amazon. So was this really true? Somehow, what was being discovered by science seemed to be connected to spirituality. For example, Emoto also said that water connects our 4 dimensions to the soul's 5th dimension. Did Emoto miss something? Well, I'll give you the answer to that very soon. But for now, let's focus for a bit. Let's move to the group number 2, the disbelievers, the second school of thought scientists who did not agree at all with Fritz Albert Popp's interpretation. They felt that Popp was misinterpreting the results found in the experiment and had gone astray. There were mainly 3 scientists in this group: Fritz Schaefer, Terence Quickenden, and Masaki Kobayashi from Japan. Look, by that time, it had undoubtedly been established with proper experimental proofs that our body and even plant and animal cells emit very weak intensity light. Ultra-weak photon emissions, or biophotons, as we saw, are in the range of about 1 to 1000 photons per centimeter square per second. But Popp's grand theory, linking this to consciousness, was considered very speculative by these scientists and not at all based on evidence. However, these scientists had an alternative explanation. An idea that had already started developing in parallel since the 1930s, that is, 50 years earlier. The story begins in the 1930s itself, when the scientist Alexander Hollandier tested Gurwitsch's idea for the first time. And he said that this weak light is actually being produced in the cells. It could also be created due to chemical reactions as a byproduct. Just like we've seen bioluminescence in sea creatures and some flies like fireflies, there must be some kind of similar light, but this was just their basic idea without any evidence, which was later explored after the invention of the photomultiplier in the 1950s. American scientists Bernard Strehler and William Arnold worked on this and rigorously tested this idea on plant and algae cells. Now, after conducting several experiments and tests, they also published this in a research paper, Light Production by Green Plants, in a proper peer-reviewed science journal, the Journal of General Physiology, which means their research was approved by other scientists. In this paper, as you can see, they revealed that the light coming out from the plant is exactly proportional to the metabolic activities happening in the plants, that is due to photosynthesis. So it was clear that this light has some link with metabolism, which is also called chemiluminescence. But exactly how are these weak photons being created? What is the exact mechanism behind them? To understand this at the root level, whether it's the laws of physics and chemistry or spiritual laws, we needed advanced technology in optics and photography, and in the 1980s, there was only one country that was ahead of everyone else in this field. Tell me which country, the country where even today, almost all the top camera manufacturing companies are based in Japan. Masaki Kobayashi is a researcher in biophysics and electronics at Tohoku University in Japan. He has been one of the biggest skeptics of Fritz Popp since the 1980s. And he started doing research on plant cells from a very young age. He knew that if we want to reach the root cause of the light emitted from the cell, we would need very advanced imaging technology, and that's why since the late 80s, he has been working with Japanese industries. He started research tie-ups, and in 1999, he got a major breakthrough. Kobayashi, together with companies like Hamamatsu Photonics, developed a super advanced camera to capture extremely sensitive images. A cooled, charge-coupled device camera, or charge-coupled device camera. This camera was like a shift from a black and white television straight to a color television. Because number one, this camera was cooled down to minus 120 degrees Celsius. Because of this, thermal noise during image capturing was almost negligible. Number two, it could literally detect even single photons. With their exact location in space and time, earlier photomultiplier tube devices could only detect photons at a single point source. That means they could only confirm that photons were being released, but couldn't do real-time imaging at multiple locations. Number three, these new charge-coupled device cameras could create a complete 2D real-time map that evolves in real time. Based on the flow of photons, this means now we could know exactly where, how, and when photons were released in a system and how many were released, allowing you to literally observe these ultra-weak photon emissions very accurately. And number four, through high-throughput lenses. It had now become easy to process large amounts of information as well. With this generational leap technology, Kobayashi was now ready. To conduct a historical experiment, a rat was needed. To study the light coming from the rat's brain and to pinpoint its exact source. The experiment was quite simple. They took some rats and exposed their brains. They were placed in front of charge-coupled device cameras in a dark room for about 20 minutes. Along with that, an electroencephalogram machine was also connected to their heads to measure the brain's electrical activities, and a cerebral blood flow device was also placed to monitor their blood flow and, consequently, their oxygen levels. To monitor as well. So basically, they were going to get three types of data from the brain. Number one, the brain's electrical activity. Number two, data on blood flow and oxygen levels. And number three, the exact locations of photon emissions and a two-dimensional graphical data of the time periods. When they ran the experiment, they noticed some interesting patterns. Whenever there was a spike in electrical activity or oxygen levels in the brain released more photons. And this pattern was completely consistent. Now, electrical activity and oxygen consumption. An increase in these clearly meant that there was neuronal activity happening in the cells. To support this, metabolism, meaning energy production, is happening, and whenever metabolism happens, what is generated more as a byproduct? Well, on one side, there's normal clean water, and on the other side, reactive oxygen species, which means reactive oxygen species. Now, water clearly doesn't emit photons, so it's these reactive oxygen species or reactive oxygen species that do. It's not secretly emitting light. Well, from the data of this experiment, with proofs and evidence, Kobayashi has made some important discoveries. For example, the brain of mouse number 1 literally glows due to stress. Yes. These light particles, photons, are being created in an animal cell due to cell metabolism. Number 2, due to this metabolic stress, the levels of reactive oxygen species, which is also a byproduct of metabolism, also increase. And number 3, the most important. As reactive oxygen species increases, photons also increase. So could it be that reactive oxygen species is responsible for the photons? Is reactive oxygen species the hidden culprit? The one we were considering as proof of the soul or consciousness. Well, Kobayashi wasn't going to stop after coming this far. There was still a huge discovery and a major revolution to come. Because if this finding was correct, it could literally help with deadly diseases like cancer. Could be stopped before time. In 2007, Kobayashi conducted another smart experiment to confirm the causal link between reactive oxygen species and this ultra-weak photon emission. Just look at the brilliance of this scientist one after another. He took 2 cowpea plants and deliberately applied a special type of virus, cucumber mosaic virus, on them. This was because he wanted to trigger an allergic response in the plant. Now, what happens in an allergy? Simply put, basically more stress is created. So more stress is equal to more reactive oxygen species. And technically speaking, the body starts killing the cells so that the virus doesn't spread, which in turn increases the turnover rate of the cells. This means metabolic stress increases, and as a result, reactive oxygen species. So in short, if an allergy is triggered, reactive oxygen species will increase. Now, if reactive oxygen species is the hidden culprit, then as it increases, the release of photons will also increase. And this is where another smart move comes in. They had already injected a powerful antioxidant, Tyron, into a plant. It binds with a common reactive oxygen species superoxide, that is O2, and destroys it. And then when they measured the amount of photons in both plants, they saw this. Number 1, exactly in the areas where the allergy was triggered, the number of photons spiked there. That means the plants were literally glowing extra while fighting the virus. In fact, a gradient was created. That means the closer to the allergy area, the more photons there were. Number 2, the antioxidant Tyron reduced the intensity of these photons by 50 to 80%, which clearly meant that reactive oxygen species was the main cause of these photons, because antioxidants neutralize reactive oxygen species. That's exactly what they reduce. They finally proved that reactive oxygen species is the actual reason why we glow. We had come so far in the research of these biophotons. From the world of spirituality and speculations, we were back in the domain of practical, logical, and hardcore evidence-based science. Now, yes, this meant that we can't detect the soul or consciousness with them, but we can 100% detect deadly diseases like cancer. In 1995, Kobayashi proved in experiments on mice that cancer cells glow 1.51 to 4.73 times more than normal cells. That means, in a way, these cancer cells are literally screaming for help through light. But these experiments were done on mice, and in 2004, they also proved this in humans through advanced cancer cell imaging. That cancer cells indeed emit many more photons than normal cells because they spread rapidly and uncontrollably. This clearly meant that cancer can be detected at a very early stage, even before the very first tumor is created. Can be done. Today, we are only able to detect cancers after tumors have formed through biopsies and magnetic resonance imaging scans. But just imagine, if we could identify abnormalities in cell activity even before tumors are created, how many lives could be saved? Because cancer recovery is all about timing. In 2009, Kobayashi proved that the glow of our body exactly matches our body clock, that is, the circadian rhythm. During the day, when metabolism is high, we literally glow more, and at night during rest, we glow less. In 2019, they showed something truly beautiful, the miracle of nature, how the body's glow changes during the evolution from a caterpillar to a butterfly. If you watched Pokemon in your childhood, you might remember how creatures glow before they evolve. Well, kind of the same thing happens in real life too. During morphological transformation, the glow just isn't visible to our eyes. And in the same year, they also proved that if you spend more time outside in the sunlight, your skin will have more reactive oxygen species due to increased ultraviolet exposure, which will cause more biophotons to be released. So basically, ultraviolet-induced skin damage can be detected through biophotons. This is such a vast area, friends, that there is no limit to its medical applications. Allergies in the body, chronic inflammation, mutations. We can understand abnormalities just by their glow. And as soon as artificial intelligence joins this field and data libraries are created, doctors will be able to quickly identify problems just based on patterns.
Cancer research is increasingly powered by data now. We have the tools to make a huge difference to human life.
This invention has huge potential. But finally, before I tell you where the scientists who created theories of consciousness went wrong, didn't you wonder how exactly photons are being created because of reactive oxygen species? What is its exact mechanism? Well, Kobayashi suggested this in his 2014 research review. Basically, if I explain this process in very short and easy language, then look, what is reactive oxygen species? Our cell produces energy, and reactive oxygen species is a waste product of this. As the name suggests, reactive oxygen species. These are oxygen-based molecules that are basically extremely reactive. Why are they reactive? Mostly because of two reasons. Number one, either they have unstable electrons. That means they have a deficiency of electrons in their last shell, and to fulfill that, they keep wandering around. For example, superoxide or O2, think of these oxygen molecules like a single virgin guy. Or, number two, these are stable molecules, but the bonds between them are weak, like hydrogen peroxide, H2O2. In this, the bond between the oxygens is weak, and just like a wife stuck in an unhappy arranged marriage, it's ready to fall in love with someone else, to bond with someone else. Now what happens is, if an illegitimate relationship is set up, the whole house gets ruined, right? Exactly the same thing happens in our body too. The desperate reactive oxygen species try to snatch electrons from the DNA, proteins, and lipids of our cells. And they weaken their structure. Think of it like this. What would happen if you constantly started removing bricks from the base of a building? That building would collapse, right? Exactly the same thing happens in our body too. But all these reactions that are happening, the transfer of electrons by reactive oxygen species, basically, just like we learned in physics in an electromagnetic field, they appear to us as photons. The momentum of electrons being pushed here and there is what we see as light particles or photons. So that's what it is. Basically, what's the actual reason our body glows? Now let me also clear this up, guys. And I myself learned this just a few months ago. Reactive oxygen species is not all bad. In fact, in normal amounts, our body really needs it because it plays a very important role in signaling. It sends messages to the body for recovery and detoxification. It sends these signals to different cells. In fact, reactive oxygen species is extremely necessary for detoxification. If you do bodybuilding, then without reactive oxygen species, your body won't even build. Because after a hardcore workout, it's the reactive oxygen species molecules that very effectively communicate the message for protein synthesis. That's what starts muscle building in the body. In fact, in one research study, taking antioxidants like vitamin C and vitamin E supplements right before or after workout actually blunted muscle building stimulation to a large extent. And after a few months, the people who were taking these supplements built less muscle. So reactive oxygen species has many important roles in our body within normal limits. But if they increase, then they cause destruction. So, in a way, as Gurwitsch first said, the light that comes out of our body sends growth signals. This is kind of true. I mean, not literally that photons are sending messages through coherent patterns, but the science behind this light. The real truth is, reactive oxygen species is definitely sending these messages. You know, science is a beautiful journey of discovery that builds from the fundamentals and slowly grows based on evidence. People look at a big discovery from so many different angles. Some see it from a spiritual angle, while others see it as a brilliance of nature itself. My aim in this video was also to show you how science develops over a period of time. Science builds from the fundamentals. And Fritz Albert Popp, Korotkov, and Masaru Emoto made some scientific discoveries, based on which they formed several theories of their own. They even demonstrated these through visual experiments, but none of their experiments were peer-reviewed. That means they were not checked by other scientists and published in any reputed science journal. They were not published. Even Popp's data on creating coherent patterns of magical light was not found to be consistent. As for Korotkov, with his gas discharge visualization device, he was not actually seeing any magical aura or energy fields, but rather moisture, pressure, and electrical conductivity. And Emoto, he was a businessman. He made his book a New York Times bestseller. He was happy just to get it to the New York Times bestseller list. But these ideas have created a huge industry that still runs today under the names of pseudoscience, parapsychology, mystical science, and even spiritual science. And even today, millions of people believe in these baseless things. The scientific voice gets suppressed and sensational stories are always promoted. These mystical ideas were never published in any scientific journal. They were only published in their books. And these ideas were exactly what people wanted to hear, not the actual boring truth. Under the echoes of their larger-than-life theories and charismatic storytelling, the quiet voice of truth was suppressed. And then finally, when the truth presented itself to the world with all the evidence, those who understood, and those who didn't. This is Gaurav Thakur signing off. Jai Hind.